And so
Okay.
on top of that, we have to have what makes a steak good?
Muscle and fat.
Muscle and fat, exactly. And so and marbling, to be really specific. Now, when we're judging these steers live, okay, obviously we can't tell what kind of marbling they're going to have. But
Yeah.
how it works is cattle put on fat externally to internally. All right. And so in
Mm-hmm.
order to have marbling, they have to be fat enough on the outside, right? And so that's
Yep.
something we can see. So that's why finish is really important. And so, but along with that, we don't want them too fat. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. And that's where I say compositional correctness, because what that means is muscle in relation to fat. Okay. It's kind of a ratio. Okay. The other thing really important is we got to be able to move. And that's whenever you hear me say the word structure here tonight, that's what I'm talking about is how they move and how they walk. Okay. So that's a pretty high importance. And then balance and eye appeal. That's kind of the other important pieces that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to break that down here in just a little bit. And what I always say is it kind of works. All these things work together in kind of a funnel. And so when I go to judge a show, okay, and if you ever judge livestock competitively there on a team, this will also kind of help you place classes. This is how I like to think about it.
Okay.
Is muscle, like we said, that's first priority. And so what I look at is, do these cattle or what cattle have enough muscle? And we're going to talk about what enough muscle is here in a little bit. All right. Of the cattle that have enough muscle, we're going to fall down that funnel there. And then we're going to talk about, are those cattle with muscle finished enough? Are they compositionally correct? Are they not too fat? Are they not too lean? They're right in terms of their finish, okay? And so of the cattle that have that, we're going to funnel down even more to structure. Of the cattle that have enough muscle, are compositionally correct, which one of those moves, or which one of those move? And so of the cattle that move, are muscular and compositionally correct, then we can start putting on the extras in terms of some balance and eye appeal. And this all goes into effect that you may win a carcass contest, but maybe not do quite as well in the live show. And why would that be? Why would that be the case? How can you win a carcass contest but be last in your class in the show?
Maybe you could. Maybe the meat has some more marbling, but doesn't look as finished on the outside.
Yeah, that's absolutely a piece of it, for sure. For sure, that's absolutely a piece of it. And the other thing is the other side of it is you may, us in the beef industry, we're trying to constantly make cattle better. And so if it was we just sorted shows on muscle and muscle alone, then that could be way easy. Anybody can tell which one's wider, which one has more muscle. Pretty simple. And so the part about making cattle better in terms of making them walk right and then having some look and some quality to them is a pretty high importance, because we're just trying to improve the beef industry as a whole. Okay. So what we're going to do, let's just talk about muscle here real quick. Is that one, that steer that's up there right now, does that calf have muscle?
Yeah.
He's got a lot of it. All right. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see my mouse there. Can you see my mouse moving?
Yeah.
And so you can tell we evaluate some muscle down here in his quarter. We call this his quarter. Essentially his butt is his quarter. Okay. Quarter and stifle. Okay. And so we're going to evaluate there. This forearm. Okay. Forearm is a really good indication of muscle, because a forearm can't lie to us. And what I mean by that is up over their top here, we can make it look wider with some fat. And kind of the same thing there in their quarter and their stifle and other places we evaluate muscle. The forearm is one area that's really unique to the body, because it doesn't actually show, or it doesn't actually put on fat to an appreciable extent. And so if they're big and expressive in their forearm, that's a pretty good indication of how much muscle they're going to have from their back. Okay. And so we can look at muscle over their top line. We want big tops because that's where our ribeye steaks come from. It's a good way to think about that. We got our quarter and our stifle there, and we can tell that steer has a tremendous amount of muscle. That was the champion steer there at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo 2 or 3 years ago, I think. Pretty good steer. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that one have muscle?
No.
No, that is a light muscled creature. All right. And that's, that's definitely on the other extreme for sure. And so that guy, he may marble the best of anything you've ever seen. He's probably not going to because he's a continental breed. Continental breeds don't typically marble as good. That's a sharp, or I think that's actually a key. But I don't know what that is. But probably ain't going to marble very good. But he could be a good carcass steer. But from a live evaluation standpoint, he doesn't have any muscle. And so we can't tell if that guy's going to be any good when he gets hung up, okay? And so the big important thing as far as muscle is muscle's easy to read. Anybody can tell which one's wider and stouter, all right? And so now let's talk about some compositional correctness. And this is what's going to take maybe just a little bit longer is so like I said earlier, we don't want them too lean because like I said, they have to be able to marble and they have to have external fat in order to marble, right?
Yeah.
And so that calf that we have up on the screen right there, do you think he's fat enough? Is he ready to eat yet?
No.
No, he's pretty skinny. That steer is pretty skinny, okay? So that guy, he does not have what we would expect enough external fat in order to marble. I would say he's probably not gonna marble very good, okay? But on the other end of the spectrum, is that animal compositionally correct?
No, probably not.
That one is on the other extreme. That one is too fat. Okay?
Yeah.
Because yes, we have to have fat in order to marble, but we also don't want to trim a bunch of fat off. Okay? So what compositional correctness is like I said earlier, it's the relationship of muscle to fat. All right? So that guy has, well, that's actually a cow there, but that animal has too much fat in relation to muscle. All right? The last one didn't have enough fat in relation to muscle.
Yeah.
Now, we talk about compositional correctness. This is a good example of a compositionally correct animal. That one, to me, looks to be finished enough, and we can tell some finish by some depth of body. We read some fat there in its brisket, okay, and kind of up in their neck to some extent. We can tell up by their tail head. Have you ever heard of pone fat?
No.
So pone fat, we're going to talk about their pin bones, which are back here. Pin and pone, if you remember that. Pin bones are up kind of by their tail head. You can see this one has a big old glob of fat. That's all pone fat is what we call that, okay?
Okay.
Big and developed there in its brisket. A lot of depth of body. I mean, we can tell that thing is plenty fat. But yet this one still has some filling there in its brisket. That one's fat enough because we can tell he's got some depth back through his flank. He's deep bodied. And the encouraging thing about that one is that's another steer that showed there at Houston. And at Houston, they have to slick shear him. And so that guy, to still be that deep back in through his flank with no hair helping him there is pretty good.
Yeah.
He's fat enough, but you can still see some muscle shape in that steer. All right. Yeah. He's still got some shape there through his quarter. Can't really read over his top line there. But that steer's fat enough. All right. But not overdone. All right. Any questions so far? I hope I'm not going too fast here.
No, it's good so far.
Perfect. Now, reading fat, relatively simple. Reading muscle, again, relatively simple. So now let's talk about structure. This is where a bulk of the discussion is going to lie between structure and balance and some eye appeal there. All right. And again, structure is how they move. This is where livestock evaluation becomes kind of an art, is because we're going to read skeleton, we're going to read bones through hide, muscle, fat, hair, all right? And so we're going to read and actually read the angles of their skeleton, because that becomes very, very important as per how they move, okay? And so that guy, if we just kind of study his picture right there, I'm going to draw some lines on him now, all right? And the reason I do that is we're going to read the angle of his shoulder right here, okay? The angle of his shoulder is very, very important. We want a 45-degree angle to the angle of their shoulder, okay? And you can kind of, if you can kind of see what I'm reading right there, it's from the top of their shoulder down to the point of their shoulder, okay? You can kind of see right where his neck joint's out. I mean, there's a little bit of a line right there, and that's his actual scapula, all right?
Okay.
So I drew a line where that scapula and his shoulder blade lies, okay? And so the reason we want a 45-degree angle is if we are to imagine, this is a good predictor of movement. I can, based on a picture, I can almost guarantee where his front foot is going to land when he steps out and reaches, okay? And it's because if we can read the angle of his shoulder and pretty much draw a line straight to the ground, I would guess his front foot is going to step right there. And of course, we want him to be flexible. We want him to move right, all right? And so read the angle of his shoulder, 45-degree angle here, and then 45-degree angle kind of back to their elbow. And you can see where that line's drawn there. And the other thing that's really important, so you can kind of see where I drew a line here. We want kind of a backwards, or not a backwards, we want kind of a C shape to the front side of their knee, all right? And the reason it's important is, again, that gives them some flex that allows them to be comfortable when we set them there into motion and just standing there. Because, and the reason structure becomes important is, again, we can put a ton of muscle in these cattle and make them big and heavyweight, but we expect a lot out of these guys, especially once we start thinking about even feedlot steers. Okay, they're not being shown nothing, but structure is still incredibly important, because we expect these cattle to weigh 1,400 pounds essentially in the grand scheme of things. And so that's a lot of weight on bones, all right? And so it's important that they can handle it and their skeleton can still handle it and move correctly. And so that's why we want them to have some flex and some cushion there. That's why the angle of their shoulder is important. Now, the angle of their hip is no different. You can see both of these lines that I drew here are about the same. And what I'm reading here, I'm going to go back to the regular picture so you can see just a little better. What I'm reading there is I'm pretty much drawing a line essentially from his tail head down to his stifle, which is right here. Okay, that's the stifle joint. We can kind of see it's just right above his flank almost. Okay. And so we want that to be a 45-degree angle as well, because once again, if we can picture, we can draw a line where that front foot is going to plant. It's going to probably be right about there, because if we draw a line straight to the ground, that's just deals with some flexibility there. Essentially, something that we tell the judging team here at UW is we call it cowboy structure. And so we call it cowboy structure because if you just talk to an old rancher, what they expect cows to do is wherever their front foot leaves, if you can picture, he's going to reach back here and put his front foot right there when he goes to take a step. We want his back foot to step right in the same track that he made with his front foot. You'll hear a judge say he fills his track, terms like that. That's exactly what that means. Is his back foot lands exactly where his front foot left. And we can, if we draw a line, we can expect that steer to move very, very well and be very flexible. His back foot should step right where his front foot left. Okay. So that's really important there. Now, also, I kind of talked about the structure of their leg there. Their back leg, we want some flex down into their pastern as well. And where I'm showing right here is their pastern. We want that to kind of be at a 45-degree angle as well, because there's got to be some cushion there, all right? Okay. Want some cushion down there at the ground. Now, the other thing about structure that in this PowerPoint, I should have put a video in here, but I didn't. What we can do here is I want you to think about if I were to make you crawl down on your hands and knees and I were to make you post up with your arms, you could not move your arms, and I made you crawl, what is your back going to do in order to move?
Like moved side to side, or?
Yeah, it's going to kind of you're going to have to kind of kink your back up, all right,
Yeah.
in order to move. Cattle are no different. If we straighten these lines out, which I'm going to show you here in a little bit, if we make them straighter shouldered or straighter in their hock and their hip, their skeleton has to give somewhere. And so they'll pull up in their top line. And so that's why when I evaluate structure at a show or in a judging contest or even just looking at cattle, especially like looking at babies right now, that's something that's very, very important to me is making sure their top line stays level in them. Because if their top line stays correct, then that means that the angles of their skeleton should be good, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to kind of give a bad example here. So this guy, at the time that this show happened, not a bad steer, all right? But from a structure standpoint, we can pick on that guy just a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
He's just a little bit straighter there in the angle of his shoulder. Again, drawing a line just right here. All right? Not quite a 45-degree angle. Again, if we were to draw a line where his front foot is going to plant, we don't have the same flexibility that other steer did. All right? Same thing there in his hip. We can draw a line right down to the ground. He's only going to probably move his back leg to right there. So he doesn't have that same kind of flexibility. Again, we can just tell that based on a picture. Reading the angles of their skeleton there is very, very important. I would expect, obviously I didn't see the steer move, but I would expect what's going to happen when that steer moves is he's going to miss his stride. He's going to miss his track there. He's not going to meet where his front foot landed. And then on top of it, I'm going to expect his top line, his spine is going to come up in him. He's going to start to roach up there in his top line because that's where the give in his skeleton is. We want the give in their skeleton to be down in their legs, not in their top line. Okay?
Okay.
Any questions as far as structure goes, talking about that?
No.
Okay. The good news is I didn't really find a picture here, but this steer, just in terms of just looking at legs, and obviously they've done a great job of getting this guy fit. And so, he still has some set there to his knee. And so not really a big concern. When we get him way too straight, actually the worst case scenario is they're going to start to buck over in their knee. And that's bad news bears. We don't want that to happen at all. A lot of cattle have that problem. And they get dunked for it, which they should. That if I can tell you again, judging a show, if a steer gets pretty straight in their knee or bucked over in their knee, they're going, if they're not last in class, they are darn close to last in class.
Okay.
Again, the good news is in terms of just feet and legs there, down in his pastern, he still has some set there to his pastern. And again, it kind of helps. They got him fit very well, but he's still got some set there. So not too bad. He's just too straight up here. He's too straight there in his hip and too straight there in his shoulder. The other thing that I want to talk about that I should have put a picture on here as well, but I didn't, is feet. Feet are also incredibly important because I always talk about this. It's hard to build a brick house without a foundation. And so down at their foundation, they need to be good in terms of their feet. We want big square feet because if you think about it, have you ever put on shoes that are way too small?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you walk?
Kind of stiff and weird.
Yeah, stiff and weird, not very good, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing for cattle. Their feet are their shoes. And so if they're walking on itty-bitty little tiny feet, and especially the front side of their toes, if they're tiny up front, then they're going to have to sit up on their pastern. They're going to have to get balance somewhere, and they're not going to be able to flex very good. If we make big square feet and each of their toes are square and they're even, that gives them some flex. And there's a lot of schools of thought that some people think that the shape of their foot determines the angles of their skeleton. Some people think the angles of their skeleton determine the shape of their foot. I think they kind of work in tandem, because if the angles of their skeleton are good in terms of their shoulder and their hip, and especially just the structure of their leg, then the wear on their feet should be even. And so if you think about if these cattle were to go out here in Wyoming, we've got big, large pastures. And so if, let's say these cows that run out on big, large pastures, just thinking about the wear on their feet, just like if you were to, if you got a pair of boots, you can tell real quick how you, or where you put pressure on your feet, because you can tell how the rubber wears. My personally, the right side or the inside of my shoes are always worn down further than the outside. I'm not a very good structured animal. All right. And so it's just the exact same thing in cattle. Wherever their body, or wherever their feet and legs, essentially, wherever they put their balance, you can tell where it's going to wear. And we want even wear, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That wasn't a very good way of explaining it, but all right. So feet are very, very important. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the other thing, now that we kind of talked about structure, balance is kind of incorporating structure. We talk about balance and eye appeal next. And those two things all kind of encompass everything that we've talked about so far. All right. And so as far as just basic market steer things, muscle, finish, and structure, those are three economically important traits. They matter a ton. Okay. Those all matter in beef production to a very high extent. Now we're talking about adding the extras. All right. So now we're talking, we're to the bottom side of this funnel, that this is where champions are made, essentially. Because if they have enough muscle, and what I mean, I guess I didn't get to this earlier either. Enough muscle can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I'm going to backtrack here. We talk about muscle. The heaviest muscled one obviously doesn't always win the show. And the reason that is again, that could, if we pack too much muscle on them, that can hinder some structure, for one. And then on top of it, I say enough muscle, because if I think that steer will cut a 12 or 13-inch ribeye, I'm going to side more on the 13 probably. If I feel that they can cut a sufficient ribeye and have enough muscle that consumers will appreciate it, then they're good enough for me, and I can start sorting more so on structure and balance and eye appeal. All right. On average, we're in a generation that is trying to get healthier as far as nutrition goes. And so consumers on average are actually taking smaller portion sizes of beef. And so if one isn't the heaviest muscled one in the world, it's okay. And so that's why you may notice that you may be the heaviest muscled one in there, but you might not always win, or somebody else might be the heaviest muscled one in there, but might not win. It's because we incorporate a couple other things into that, like balance. All right. And so when we talk about balance here, to some people, balance and eye appeal are kind of the same thing, which to an extent they are. In order to be eye appealing, they need to balance correctly. But balance to me is all their pieces fitting together. All right. Like this calf, that's all of his pieces fit together. And what I mean by that is he's not too deep there in his chest. Okay. That kind of incorporates there into eye appeal. We want their flank to be deep, or just as deep or deeper than their chest. Okay. We kind of want them. It's not quite to the extent that we maybe want market lambs per se, but we almost want them to be shaped like a doorstop in a way. Their shoulder and their chest should be shallower than what their flank is. And that steer is really good at that. Okay. His shoulder is really, really smooth. He's not big and coarse there in his shoulder. We want smooth shoulders in these cattle, okay? That should all fit together and be smooth there. And you can tell real easy. I mean, all those pieces fit together in that steer, okay? He's level there in his top line. Everything fits together in that steer exceptionally well. Does that make sense what I'm meaning by that?
Yeah.
How his shoulder hooks up there into his rib. It's just very smooth. It's very attractive, I guess you could say, okay? Yeah. So we talk about one that maybe from a balance standpoint needs fixed just a little bit. Is that a bad steer? No, that's a decent market steer, okay? That steer, though, from a balance standpoint, we can maybe pick on him just a little bit. There in his chest, he's just a little bit deeper there in his chest. And his shoulder, we can tell his shoulder's just a little bit bigger in him. We call that just a little coarser shoulder. The other thing, if you want to get real advanced with this here, all right, so we can kind of tell where the base of his stifle muscle lays. Okay. The thing throws, you kind of see where I'm pointing at with my mouse there. That's where the bottom of that muscle is. And so the thing that kind of throws him off balance is this, where that muscle lies, is actually shallower than where the base of his chest is. And that just doesn't quite balance as good. It doesn't help him be quite as attractive and put together the pieces that other steer did. Now, the other thing, I'm going to tie this into some eye appeal here, okay? The other thing is that steer, if we kind of read him there up over his neck, he's starting to get a little extra crest, and that just kind of ties into some maturity. We want cattle to be youthful looking, okay? And that steer is a little bit shorter up through his neck. Not that long-necked ones are always good, okay? I'm probably worse about it than some guys, but length of neck rarely determines how a show is placed for me. Length of neck, I think we've gotten a little too carried away with caring about how long a neck is. I could care less, but it just kind of throws him off balance in the sense that he's just kind of shorter and more jammed up there. He's got some extra crest there over his neck. So that steer, just from an eye appeal standpoint, doesn't quite fit together as what maybe this steer does. You can tell he's flatter there over the top of his neck. Just a really fresh, really youthful looking steer. All right.
Okay.
And so now, with that being said, I'm going to give you another really good example of a steer that's very, very eye appealing. And this is where, again, we're going to talk about how eye appeal pretty much incorporates everything. Because in order to be eye appealing to me, you need to have enough muscle. And we can tell that steer has some shape there through his quarter. That steer, from a composition standpoint, you can tell he's got some depth of body. He's got some, you can tell that steer's got some fat to him.
Yeah.
But he's not too fat. That steer still looks very, very fresh. That was the steer that actually won the American Royal last year.
Okay.
That steer puts together, or 2 years ago, I guess, that steer puts together a tremendous amount of good because he has some muscle. He has some fat. That goes into it. That helps him be eye appealing. But then we talk about structure. The angle of his shoulder is very good. The angle of his hip and back into his hind leg is also very good. That helps with some eye appeal. The set of his knee, he has a C shape there to his knee. And so that all incorporates into some eye appeal. But then we add in the extras, okay? The length of that steer's neck. That steer has some length up front. He's very fresh and very youthful there. Steer's really level out of his hip, okay? The levelness of his hip is really good. And then, again, we talk about some angles of skeleton there in terms of his pastern and the set of his hind leg. The other thing that helps that steer balance, that helps him a ton, is he's got some bone. He's got some stoutness. We want big, big legs in these cattle because it helps them balance really well. And it helps, just helps them be very eye appealing. That steer has some stoutness. He has some bone. That steer just looks like a man, but he looks like a man in terms of his muscularity and his power and his bone. But then on top of it, he puts it together in a supermodel look. And I clipped that steer as a baby. I worked for the people that sold that steer, and that guy moved like a cat. And so that's exactly what we're looking for is we want a judge that I respect very, very much, a very smart guy. His name is Mark Hogue, Dr. Mark Hogue, and he said it best when he judged the National Western there a few years ago, is that we're trying to put as manly of a beastly look into a supermodel body and still move like a cat. That's what we're trying to do as far as selecting steers goes. All right?
Okay.
And so any questions so far as what we're selecting for in these fat steers?
No. Not.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think I'm good right now.
If you got any, if at any point you got any kind of questions, you just wave at me. We'll stop and talk about it there. But that's an awful market steer. He covers the fundamentals of being muscular, compositionally correct, and then he has the extras of being really good looking and sound. Okay.
Okay.
So now let's talk about this. Now, when we start picking out babies at this time of year, are we going to use the same criteria that a judge is going to use to pick a champion fat steer there in August as we will to pick a calf right now in October?
No.
So I think some important things that we're going to talk about as far as this goes is something that's incredibly important is structure. When I'm looking at baby calves right now, structure is one of the utmost important things that I look for. Because if you think about it this way, if they are bad moving right now at 6, 7, 8, 900 pounds, are they going to be good moving when they're 1,400?
No.
No. It's only going to get worse. And so structure is something that's very, very important to me at this point. Another thing that I certainly look for is some skeletal width. I get in behind, when I go look at babies there in person, I always like to get behind those cattle and watch them walk away. They need to have some base width, be wide based, because that is a good indication of how much muscle and how much power they're going to put on once they get older. Okay?
Okay.
The other thing that's really, really important to me is, and we didn't really talk about it quite as much as I should have, but body shape. The shape of their rib is incredibly important, because we want them to be kind of round bodied. We want the shape of their rib to be round. We want it to be deep, because for one, that shows some feedability. If their rib shape is correct, they're going to get fat easier. All right. It's just kind of a physiological thing there. The other thing that I'm going to show you here is that becomes very important is the shape of their rib means a lot, because we put muscle on top of their rib. The top muscle that you eat, your ribeye steak, that is the longissimus dorsi muscle. You don't need to know that. That's just trivial there. But that muscle, there's two muscles. It's the longest muscle in the body, okay? And so we want our rib to be round, because that muscle has to sit on top of something. Can you guys see what I'm marking there?
No.
No? How about if I do that?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay. And so that muscle, I want you to picture looking back from behind here. We're looking here. Here's the calf's head right here. I'm going to try to. You can picture that's his head. Okay. So here's his tail. Not a very good artist. All right. But here's his rib. Okay. That muscle has to sit on top of that rib. Okay. That's both sides of the longissimus dorsi muscle. So when we make that rib round, we give that muscle some surface area to sit on top of there. Okay. Now, if we make him flat ribbed, kind of like that, where's that muscle got to sit? It's going to sit
on the side.
Yeah. We don't actually give that animal the availability to be big muscle and have the right kind of muscle shape. All right. And so the shape of their body is incredibly important to look at when they're babies, because they'll get fat easier. And then on top of it, they will have the availability to be big muscle. Okay.
Okay.
So that's something that's very important. I like to make sure they look good when they're babies, okay? Like I said, I don't necessarily care as a fat steer how long their neck is. But as babies, if we select one that's really already kind of crusty and already kind of short-necked, when they get fat, it's only going to get worse, all right?
Okay.
And so that kind of helps with some freshness. So we're going to look here at some babies to kind of help us here. What do we think about this steer?
It's round and has some muscle, but in its structure looks.
Yeah, I
Wow.
think this is a steer that I'm not going to lie to you. I'm actually going to try to buy him Wednesday night. He sells Wednesday night. That steer does a tremendous amount of things really good. The shape of his body's really good. He's deep-bodied, okay? We can tell that steer has some muscle. On top of it, that steer has a bunch of bone.
Yeah.
Hair is him a little bit, but he's got a bunch of bone. He looks like a man, but yet he's still really youthful here up front. Maybe a little bit shorter necked. He's never just going to be really, really long and sexy necked, but that steer still looks the part. He still looks youthful and fresh. The angle of his shoulder is very, very good. Okay? He maybe, if we were to pick on this steer a little bit, he gets a little bit rounder in his hip. He isn't quite as level out of his hip here. Just gets a little bit rounder. And that is a concern that you can have on that guy. But that's a pretty good steer. Okay?
Okay.
This is, well, a little bit of a different kind of steer here. This is a wannabe Hereford. He's not actually a Hereford, but marked like one. Okay? Again, we talk about the set of his back leg. That is the one that, as a baby, has a lot of quality. He has some angle there to his pastern. He's really good out of his hip. That steer is probably a little greener condition, a little skinnier than what that other steer is, but they don't need to necessarily just be the fattest when they're babies, all right? And so, again, very, very youthful there up front. That's another really, really kind of nice, or that's another nice kind of a steer. Maybe just not quite the same amount of muscle and the same amount of power that we see in that other one, but that would be a steer that I would feel comfortable with buying as a baby and having confidence that I can do good there in the end. Okay. A little bit of a different kind of steer in this picture. Okay. Again, muscle, body, really, really good in that steer. Okay. But one concern that I would have on him, that at only a couple months old here in September, that steer's already got kind of some crest there. He's kind of just looking a little bit older there in his head, his shoulder. That's the biggest concern. I went and looked at these cattle not too long ago, and he's a little bit bigger there in his shoulder. So at only 800 or 700 pounds, if he's already kind of big-shouldered, a little bit crestier neck, do you think that's going to be an awesome one come 1,350 pounds in August?
No.
So that'd be a concern that I have on him, but still big-bodied, really good in terms of his muscle there, okay? Now, this is one that's interesting, okay? Long-necked for sure. He's fresh. He's youthful looking. But this steer I would almost have a bigger concern with as far as buying as a baby, because from a structure standpoint, we can tell there's the top of his shoulder, there's the base of his shoulder. You see how he's just a little bit straighter? Just based on the picture. It's a little bit straighter there in his shoulder. Doesn't have quite as much flex down there in his pastern. He's a little bit straighter in his hip. That steer from a movement standpoint would be more of a concern to me. I would have kind of some reservations buying that one because, again, come 1,350 pounds next August, his structure issues are going to be worse, okay? And so structure is something that's very, very important to me, okay, when we start talking about these babies, because, again, we expect them to put a lot of weight on a skeleton, and so they need to be sound enough to carry that, all right? So just to kind of wrap up our discussion here, before we kind of open it up to some questions, I suppose, I've kind of included just some pictures of calves as babies and as they mature into fat steers, because I think once you start talking about selecting your steer at this point in the game, it's important to just kind of get in your mind, what is that guy going to look like at 1,350 pounds? Because Yeah, we can show them at some jackpots. Yeah, we can show them early on. But you sell your calf there at county fair. That's where the big money's made. That's where you really want to win. That's the end point goal. And so it's kind of important to just picture what these cattle are going to look like there as fat steers, okay? And so like this calf, all right? Again, that steer takes a really quality picture there as a baby, and even as a fat steer, takes a really quality picture. That was actually one that my brother showed this year. And that steer was an awesome calf to have. He was really good-legged, and you can kind of see how he progressed later on as a fat steer there at State Fair. You can tell just the angle of his back leg is really good. He has some flexibility to him. That steer, one biggest issue that I have with him is, for one, he didn't eat ever. And so you can tell he doesn't look fat enough. And that was the biggest issue with that steer. He wasn't fat enough. And we can almost kind of tell, you can't really tell in this picture, but he's a little bit tighter there up through his flank as a baby. And I knew that when we bought him there as a baby calf. A little bit tighter up through his flank. And that just enhanced or exemplified, I guess you can say, when they get tighter up in through their flank, they don't feed near as good. And so that's a lot of the problem why he didn't get quite as fat as what he needed to be. And we actually fit his flank into him pretty good. His natural flank line's about right there. And so that would be kind of an issue that I have with that steer. But that steer stayed sound his whole life. That steer had some muscle, and he was good looking. Steer just didn't get fat enough, okay?
Okay.
The last picture that I'm going to show you here, this is a good example of one that turned out to be a great one, all right? This is actually that steer that I showed you just a little bit ago. This was a steer that I worked for the people that sold this calf, and you can tell this is kind of a bad example because this steer got sicker than a dog right before he took this picture, and so he looks really shallow and really hard. But the good news is as a baby, like I said earlier, they don't need to just be way fat right now. And so you can tell just by reading the angles of his skeleton and just the quality of that steer. He has some length in the neck. He looks really youthful and fresh. That steer, the angle of his shoulder is really good. The angle of his hip is really good. That steer moved incredibly well. And what you can't really tell there in this picture is the shape of his body's really good. And that steer had some muscle. And you can see what that steer turned out to be there at the end. I will tell you, that steer sold for $20,000 out of that sale. And so I'm not telling you need to go find one that looks like that and buy him for $20,000, especially in our state, because county fairs just don't sell for quite that much. But that steer turned out to be very good. And so hopefully you can kind of see how these steers progress. And that's what's really important when we start talking about selecting babies at this point, is trying to picture in your mind what they're going to look like as fat steers later on. And so hopefully that makes sense, kind of what a judge is looking for there in August, what we're trying to accomplish as far as making market steers good. And then also kind of some help to help you pick out potentially your next project for next year. All right. So any questions? That's all I've pretty much got as far as presentation goes. So now it's kind of open to you guys if you guys have any more questions.
So I have one, and it's kind of about their gaining. So how much are they supposed to gain, per day or week or?
Great question. And so cattle should gain at least 3 pounds. 3 pounds a day is what they should gain a day. If you really want to push them, and good gaining cattle will gain up to 5 pounds a day. You can get them up to 5 or 6, and that's excellent. But 3 pounds should be about your minimum. I think Sublette County has a minimum rate of gain, don't they?
We don't do rate of gain here. We should, but we have our minimum weight is 1050.
Okay, 1050.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was your county or not. Some counties have a minimum rate of gain as well, and it's got to be I think most counties are 2 1/4 a day.
Wow.
And even then, I mean, 2 1/4 is relatively, that's not gaining real hard. And so, yeah, cattle should gain right about 3 pounds and up.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions?
No.
Well, perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you guys got something out of this. And this counts for that 1009 course, doesn't it, Robin?
It does. It does. And thank you for doing this, Colby, because I do think I already have a few kids ask if I'd share it with them. So I think it'll get around pretty quickly.
Excellent. That's good.
Yeah. So
And
thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. And if you guys ever think of any more questions, feel free to shoot me an email. You can get my email there from Robin. Shoot me an email, give me a call, whatever. I'm happy to help anytime. Hope to see you guys at UW here in a few years.
So Colby, I'm just going to put you on the spot. Do you ever help kids? If kids are buying in an online sale and they're having a hard time choosing between a few animals, do you ever give them some tips?
Oh, absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah,
Good to know.
shoot, that's all I do. I should be working on homework and stuff, but I usually just look at online sales during the day. So.
That's what I was doing while you were talking. I shouldn't say that, but
Yep.
just a thing to think about, Zach, when you're out picking. I mean, and it doesn't have to be Colby either, but there's lots of people out there that that could help you with your beef. And so if before you pick yours, he's getting them from a local guy, but before you pick yours, maybe just take an iPad out and do some videoing, and then maybe ask a few people what they think.
Okay.
Before you pick one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Happy to help. Anytime you ever need help picking out a project or even as far as nutrition, feeding your project, whatever, always happy to help. So.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Colby.
Yep, not a problem.
Thank you.
Anything else before we go?
No. Think.
Good deal.
All right. Thanks. Have a
Yep.
good night.
You folks have a good night as well.
Okay.